Welcome to the Selling to Corporate podcast, where we're going to be challenging your sales beliefs around selling to corporate organizations and help you increase your bottom line profits every single month. I am Jess Lorimer, your sales expert and guide in this world of selling to corporate companies, skyrocketing your company sales and making the impact that you really want in the world. Now, don't forget, if you do enjoy the show today, please do head over to iTunes and leave us a review. But enjoy this episode, and I am really looking forward to sharing some epic sales wisdom with you. Welcome to this episode, and I am talking about something that I love and know is going to benefit your business to beat your B2B sales goals from last year. So there are some really exciting changes that I've been talking about on the podcast for a while. I'm going to be doing a full episode in February to talk about those. So I'm not going to dig into all of the exciting changes that are coming, but I did want to share something that I think will be really, really useful for all of you moving forward. And that is that over the last 4 months, almost 5 months now, actually, we have been testing something epic with our clients. And we only offered this to people who were inside the C-suite so that we could get lots of good testers. That particular something has been really, really well received. And the reason it's been really well received is because it has helped people to simplify the way that they amplify their sales moving forward. And that one simple tool is actually a B2B sales tracking spreadsheet. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're listening to this, you're like, Jess, a spreadsheet is like my worst thing ever. It's not going to change the world. But I promise you that the feedback from this spreadsheet has been phenomenal. And the reason that I'm telling you about it on the podcast is because we are now through the testing phase and have opened it up to buy for the public. If you decide to buy before the end of February, you will get a £20 discount, which you know I never do discounts. And when I say that they're going to end, they end, etc., etc. But if you want to go ahead and check out the sales tracker spreadsheet, you can purchase it for £30 plus VAT by using the code TRACK, all in caps, at the checkout. So if you want to go ahead and do that, click on the link inside the show notes and you can go ahead and grab the sales tracking spreadsheet. And I promise you that it is going to be an epic tool to help you simplify the recording of your sales for 2024 and beyond. Obviously, it's reusable. And I'm going to explain a little bit today about why you should be tracking things, even if you decide not to use the very exciting, snazzy, fancy spreadsheet that I have spent hours and hours working on. But it's up to you, right? Remember, as with everything that I put out there, you can choose to do this yourself. So it's totally up to you. But today I do seriously want to talk about tracking because it is one of the key problems I see entrepreneurs making around the sales process. And there are really, really simple hacks and changes that you can make just to make it easier. And I want you to understand today why you should bother. So one of the things I talked about in the last episode, if you haven't listened to it yet, I know January feels about 4 years long. So there are lots of reasons that you may not have listened yet. But if you haven't, go back, give a little listen, because that is all about the 4 elements that you can use to change up your sales strategy this year to really ace your revenue. When I put out and planned episodes for January, I started to think about the reasons that people typically experience hurdles, let's say, when it comes to generating the revenue that they want from their B2B sales strategy. And there are a few reasons, but really it boils down to 3, right? There are 3 main reasons that people don't hit their revenue targets. One is obviously confidence, which you might not have expected me to say. That's not in a, you have to be a really confident person to be a salesperson, but it's that underlying confidence in yourself. It's being mentally resilient. It's having confidence in your sales process and strategy that makes you able to go out and implement it and execute it. That makes a massive difference to whether or not you will achieve your sales goals, whether you will feel good about taking action on your sales goals, and ultimately whether you will do the work or get caught up in a Netflix binging procrastination cycle that everybody does from time to time, but unfortunately cannot be permanent when it comes to your B2B sales strategy. The second problem that we see people facing and that stops them achieving their revenue goals is one that you will expect to hear from me, and that's competence. It's having the actual skills and best practice strategies and guidelines to know what to actually do in your sales process. And I say this not because it's a super foundational thing that's really basic and we should all be focusing on more advanced stuff. Like, it's not to shame anybody, but the basics work. And in the online space, I think we get conned a lot by people talking about advanced strategies and advanced ways to do things and things that are secret. The reality is, when it comes to B2B sales, most people don't actually know what they are supposed to do week to week. Most people just have not worked in sales roles. And even if they have never been given a list to say, actually, week by week, these are the tasks that you should be focusing on. This is how much lead generation you should do. This is when you should send an email. This is when you shouldn't send an email. This is what you should write in a cold lead generation email versus a keep in touch email. This is what you should do when you get an objection about price. This is what you should do when you get an objection about priorities. People just don't know. But we automatically set up these businesses. We want to sell to corporates, but we've got no real idea on the fundamental activities that we need to be doing each week, each month, each quarter. And that's something I want to change for people this year. But that would take me into a whole other conversation about my secret plan. I've told you that's really coming in February. So wait out. The third thing that stops people achieving their B2B sales goals is tracking. And I know it's not sexy. I've talked about it before, and the fact that it's not sexy. And honestly, I think I've said this before. If I could develop, I was going to say a cattle prod, but I think that's quite that's quite an aggressive form of reminder. But just something like a gentle dinging or something to remind salespeople to use their CRM systems and actually track their activities, I would be a bazillionaire. I would have more money than Bezos. Like, it would be 100% the bazillion-dollar year that I could create in like minutes. And I would be that marketing case study genius. But the reality is everybody hates tracking. And I have talked about this before. I work with a lot of companies and with their salespeople to help them track better, to help them use CRM systems. And I come across it in both the companies that I work with and the entrepreneurs that we serve. And unfortunately, people tend to focus on the first two when it comes to sales. They focus on improving their confidence, improving their mindset, improving, in some cases, their powers of manifestation. Then they focus on competency, building the skill base, building the strategy with varying degrees of success, I will say, because again, if you're not a salesperson, you've never worked in that environment, you haven't been responsible for setting sales strategy before, don't beat yourself up if you haven't done it perfectly. But people then ignore tracking because tracking isn't sexy, it's not fun, it's not cool, it's time consuming. And I think people avoid tracking because it gives them this tool almost to beat themselves up with, to be super self-critical, to look at their tracking and go, oh my God, I just haven't hit my sales goals. There are tons of variables that would mean you haven't hit your sales goals. For some people, they don't actually know how to set a realistic revenue goal. So if you set an unrealistic revenue goal, can you really ever be expected to achieve it? There are lots of reasons. But tracking is one of the main ones, right? It's one of the main reasons that people do not achieve sales targets, particularly if they've set sales targets that are in fact realistic and should be eminently achievable in their industry. And the reason that people don't track is mainly comprised of it's a tool that they can beat themselves up with. So they think, oh, I haven't hit my targets. I haven't hit my goals. I must be the worst person in the world. I'm definitely the worst salesperson ever. Nobody in the history of sales has ever been as bad as me. I must sit on my sofa underneath a blanket crying about how awful I am. Again, if you've been there, we've all done it. I might not have done it about sales, but I've definitely done it about accounting, right? We've all got our thing. People also don't track because it's not ever really made easy. There are tons of CRM systems out there to choose from. And by the way, when we're talking through this episode, I'm going to outline a few different tools that you can use to help you track better. But I'm not going to specify any particular brand because ultimately you have to figure out what is going to work for you. There are some that I really like and enjoy using, and there are some that I think, I would rather shove a hot fork in my eye. But that is because of how my brain works, not necessarily because of how yours works, right? So we will all have different opinions and different things that we want to use or that would benefit us most. But most of these tools aren't that easy to set up. They're not that easy to understand. They're not always easy to generate reports from. And in all honesty, people don't get a massive dopamine hit out of recording things. I don't wake up in the morning thinking, oh my God, I'm so excited to go and write notes about the sales calls I'm going to do today. Of course not. Nobody does that. A side note, if anyone does actually do that, please email me. You are a unicorn in nature and I would love to study your brain. But you know what I mean? We're not sat there thinking how excited we are to go and record pieces of data or write up notes from a sales call or analyze how much lead generation we've done each month, because it doesn't make us feel good. It doesn't give us a dopamine hit. Usually it ties into our own feelings of inadequacy and low self-worth because perhaps we haven't done what we said we would do. And life happens, things happen. We don't always hit our goals. That is a reality. But for most people, it's very disheartening to see that on paper. If you've set yourself up for success this year and you've planned out how much lead generation you're going to do, and then you just don't do it, of course, it doesn't feel great going back and looking at that on paper, right? That's uncomfortable. And people as a breed, we all shy away from things that make us uncomfortable. That's normal. But it also doesn't help your sales process, unfortunately, because tracking is a key part of having and maintaining a good sales process. And the reason that I say that is because when we look at the ways that people typically analyze their sales performance over a year or a month or a quarter or whatever, there's no data that they're working off to change the result. So typically what happens is people look at the result and they'll say, I'm not happy with my revenue. My revenue last year wasn't good enough, or my revenue last month wasn't good enough. And then when you dig into it and you say, okay, cool, what got you there? You know, what activities did you do? They'll say, oh, well, I did some lead generation. You're like, great. How much? I don't know. Okay, cool. How many sales calls did you have? Oh, well, I think it was X. Okay. How many proposals did you send? Well, I sent, I think about 4 or 5. How many of those proposals were real versus speculative? Oh, well, they did want them, but like maybe 2 of them didn't. They wouldn't give me budget, or they didn't really have like a timeline on when it was starting. And all these things are fine. You know, again, not saying this to shame anyone, but when we start giving ourselves the ability to have these conversations without specified numbers and metrics, it makes it very, very difficult to make strategically sound decisions. What happens is we get so caught up in the reporting of our activity, either to ourselves or to somebody else, and justifying why we perhaps didn't do the things that we said we were going to do, or why we perhaps sent a proposal when the client hadn't confirmed a budget or other practicalities, that we forget what data is actually for. And it is just there to help us tweak processes, to troubleshoot, to know exactly what is going wrong and what we can do differently. Last year, I think it was last year anyway, I created a troubleshooting video. For those of you who have watched it, you may want to refresh and watch it again. For those of you who haven't, again, I'll pop it into the show notes for you so that you can go back and take a look. But when we're troubleshooting why things don't work in our business, it's important to have accurate data. And if we don't have accurate data, what ends up happening is people shift their sales strategy so wildly that they throw out the good things that they were doing and the bad. And so essentially people will restart sales strategies from zero every month, every quarter, every year because they didn't get the result they want. And I know that this seems like a really foundational thing to say. Maybe you're sat here listening to this thinking, Jess, I already know this. And I get that. I know it too. But if we all know it, why are we not doing it? And that's my question. That's always been my question to myself back when I found it difficult to track. It's always been my question to corporate sales teams when they tell me that they don't track things. And it's always been my question to entrepreneurs when they tell me, no, I don't use metrics or measurements to inform my business. Why? And like I say, the answers vary, but primarily it's, I don't like the way that looking at numbers makes me feel about myself, my goals, what I've achieved or what I haven't achieved. Or people say, I don't have time. And I hear that a lot from corporate salespeople. They'll say, Jess, I'm on so many calls all day. I don't have time to record what I'm doing. I don't have time to make notes. I don't have time to upload it to the system. But the big difference with the corporate sales teams that I work with and the entrepreneurs that I work with who are successful versus those that aren't. And when I'm talking about success, like, look, there are varying degrees of success. For some people, that is making 1 sale a month. For some people, it's making 10. For some people, it's making 50K a year. For some people, it's making 500. When we look at the people who, and I'm going to define success here as who consistently make sales, hit their targets and are not overwhelmed, they're not working 20 hours a day. The big difference is that they have all 3 components. They are confident to go out there and execute their sales strategy. They have the competency, the ability, the strategy to go and do it. And they track their metrics because they have understood that whilst tracking itself is a boring activity that is essentially a necessary evil, it makes them more money. And it really does make people more money. I noticed in my business a few years ago, one of the things that I didn't track was the time it took me to deliver things to clients. So back before I was selling the C-suite, I would sell group programs, one-to-one, email support, consulting, lots and lots of different things, because that's what the online space teaches you, right? And you might not have known me in that iteration, but if you did, you can think back and you can be like, oh, wow, yeah. Because the feedback I always used to get from my clients was, wow, you deliver so much value. You always go above and beyond. And don't get me wrong, I go above and beyond now. When I started tracking time as a metric and the time that it actually took me to create monthly trainings for a membership, to deliver email support consistently, to just hop on SOS calls for 15 minutes, I hadn't really factored those in when I was selling. So I was being vastly underpaid, like vastly, for what I was delivering. And as a result, I was having to work harder and harder. So when I burnt my business down because I said that doesn't work for me, I knew that I needed to be tracking more effectively than ever. And so in 2019, when I decided I was going to go all in on the C-suite, and that was going to be the resource that I used for entrepreneurs to genuinely change their lives, to genuinely change the way that they viewed their sales strategy, to genuinely implement, execute, to get the results that they wanted, I knew I had to track much more effectively than I had in the past. And that's what we all need to do. This isn't just about track revenue. This is about tracking all of your activities so that you can see what actually pays off. I have people who come to me and they say, but Jess, I love posting on LinkedIn. I'm like, that is awesome. Good for you, because I hate it. That's a lie, actually. I'm starting to enjoy LinkedIn more now that I don't feel the pressure to post. And I just kind of like, I'm posting when I want with things that I think are interesting, as opposed to just posting a load of stuff on the internet because people tell you have to. But I get people and they'll say, Jess, I'm posting on LinkedIn. I really love it. And I'm like, great, awesome. I love that you love that. Can you tell me how many sales have come from LinkedIn in the last year? And they're like, oh no, but people have definitely seen it. And I'm like, okay, cool. Tell me how you can track that. And they can't, but they can, if pushed, tell me about newsletters that they sent where they could track who read them or who clicked on something that they then followed up with or received a reply back from saying, yeah, we'd love to book a call with you because our company definitely needs this. And they can tell me about proactive outreach processes and their numbers around how many they sent or how many responses they got and what they were like. Those trackable activities make a massive difference to the confidence that we feel in our business, because when we can track the numbers, we know exactly how something is working or whether it's not. And also their competence, because they can identify clear areas of strength. Like, oh, I know that when I send out a newsletter, I get this kind of open rate and this many stakeholders usually reply. So I know that my newsletter is working, or I send out my newsletter. It never gets any opens. It never gets any replies. I need to figure that out and work on it. Tracking is super important for developing your confidence and your competence in other areas as a salesperson, and that shouldn't be ignored. It's also a license to print money, as my former sales director of the first ever company I worked for would say. A license to print money, Jeff. And he'd say it about lots of things that I never really expected. The recession. He's like, oh, Jess, it's a license to print money. And it was, if you did it right. He would say about any economic downturn, oh, it's a license to print money. And if you knew how, it was. He would say it about saturated markets. I'd be worried about competitors joining the space and how much more competition I'd have. And he'd be like, oh my God, Jess, it's a license to print money. Tracking is that. It is a license to print money. When you track your activities, you can track what works and what doesn't. So you can improve your strengths and you can work on any weaknesses that you have. You can inform future strategy with it in a realistic and smart way, not throwing everything out and doing it all from scratch. You can also predict results in a much easier way. You can see what actually works. So you can predict annual influxes of revenue for this year, and you can predict your revenue for next year. You can forecast much more accurately if you are tracking properly and then using that data. You can be organized about key dates that you know work really, really well in the industry that you specialize in and that don't. There's a reason that I don't work with corporate clients in August and I don't work with them in December. And that's because every year my tracking shows me exactly the same. They're not implementing training then. Doesn't necessarily mean they're not doing anything else, but it does mean that for me, no point doing stuff there because I've used my data to inform what I do. So I can take that time off and chill because I know nothing's happening. I'm not worried. Tracking's good for our mental health in that respect. And it's also really good for our boundaries around when we will work, when we won't, when we know to upsell clients, when we know to resell clients, when we know to renew clients. We can be much more organized and stop ourselves inadvertently losing revenue when we track. And that's kind of the point of today. It's to say to you that if you feel uninspired about tracking your metrics, I get it. But if you want to change your results this year and do better than you did last year, you need to do it differently and you must track. So if you are ready to start, why not start with our sales tracker spreadsheet? It is there to focus on revenue tracking. So it will tell you and adjust automatically your targets for your year. So it will give you the ability to set your own annual target. It will break that down for you into monthly targets. You can implement your sales over the year and it will automatically adjust your sales for other periods of the year. It will show you where you are to target. You can record offers that you know you sell regularly and things that are bespoke pieces of work. It is phenomenal and you can grab it for only £30 plus VAT if you use the code TRACK, all in caps, at the checkout before the end of February. All right, enjoy the rest of January. And I'll be back in February with some exciting episodes. We've got a lot coming this year. I am going to be announcing those new changes right at the beginning of February. So let's give it a go. Let's track. Let's do some awesome things and let's generate a heck of a lot of revenue. See you in the next episode.